Hello, 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 hello. Check, check. Hello, hello, hello. आ रहा है?
Very good afternoon. We are here again after quite some time to celebrate the Dr. B.D. Tilak Memorial Lecture. I think the last one was given by Sharat Chandra Lele, a very interesting talk again. Uh, so I thought I will talk a little bit about Dr. Tilak, because many of you in the audience, I'm sure, have never interacted with Dr. B.D. Tilak. I myself had the privilege of meeting him only a couple of times, because when I joined NCL, he had already left NCL. But I did have the honor to meet him a couple of times and get inspired by what he was doing even at that age. So Dr. B.D. Tilak was born on 26th of September 1918 in a small village called Karanja, which is close to Akola, closer to where you are going a few days from now. He studied in Jalgaon. He studied chemistry in Jalgaon. He did his undergraduate training uh, in Pune at the SP College and earned his BSc in 1937. He then moved to what is called the Royal Institute of Science in Bombay. I don't think that exists today. Institute of Science, okay. Right. Yeah. But they seem to have offered degrees at that time. So he did a BSc Tech degree in 1939 in the study of dyes, which are of course used widely in textile industry. And then he joined UDCT, or what is called ICT today, to do his PhD under the supervision of Dr. K. Venkatraman, who was also at ICT, UDCT at that time, and then of course came to NCL as the first Indian director of National Chemical Laboratory. He did his PhD, completed his PhD in 1943, and then went on to Oxford to do his postdoc with Sir Robert Robinson, who is a Nobel laureate. And those of you who have visited the archives, the NCL archives, will know that Sir Robert Robinson had come to NCL for the first foundation day on the 3rd of January 1950. So he did his PhD at Oxford in, can I have the lights on please? Okay. Um, did his PhD in 1946 at Oxford, and then again later went on to do sort of sabbatical with another Nobel laureate at Harvard, uh, who was Professor Woodward. So after his PhD, he came back to India and joined UDCT as a professor, and where he was pursuing chemistry of dyes, heterocyclic compounds, steroids, and so many other things, including sulfur chemistry. Very prolific researcher. He published more than 200 research papers, guided more than 95 students who did both masters and PhD under his supervision. And I know some of them actually, they are occupying very high positions in chemical industries everywhere in the country. What we know of Dr. B.D. Tilak at NCL was that he came to NCL in 1965. He was brought to NCL by his supervisor, Dr. Venkatraman, who was then the director of NCL. And he was brought to NCL as an additional director. There is no such post like that, but he was specifically created for Dr. Tilak to come and join NCL with the tacit understanding that he will take over as the director after Professor Venkatraman. And then he did take over as the director and guided NCL for 9 years from 1966 till 1978. And in NCL, he was really truly known for developing a whole lot of technologies and also licensing them, and not just licensing, they actually started producing and actually became commercial. So technologies going all the way from lab to licensing is something we do, but the next big step and an equally difficult step is to actually start commercial production after the licensing happens. And he's credited to that to the extent that when he took over as the director of NCL, the number of technologies measured in terms of metric of how much external cash flow they got to NCL was only about 15 lakhs at that time. And by the time he retired as the director, that number went to 81 crores. So a phenomenal uh, achievement in taking technologies from lab all the way to commercialization. He is, of course, a very reputed and highly decorated scientist. He was the member of all the important science academies like the INSA, the Maharashtra Academy of Sciences, and the Bangalore Indian Academy of Science. But equally, he was also a technologist. He was the chairman of the Hindustan Organic Chemicals, which is a company created specially for organic intermediates so that they supply the key materials for the dyestuff industry and other fine chemical industries as well. So he was the chairman of Hindustan Organic Chemicals for 9 years. He was on the board of directors of many large publicly funded as well as private companies, including companies like EIL, Engineers India Limited, and IPCL. He basically, as I said, was really instrumental in taking technologies from lab to market. And those of you who have read uh, Professor Doraiswamy's book on NCL, there are some very interesting anecdotes about Dr. Tilak. For instance, the first technology that NCL successfully licensed and also commercialized was acetaldehyde, which was licensed to Hindustan Organic Chemicals. And there were many things that Dr. Tilak did in that licensing of that technology, which sort of created benchmarks and practices that many years later and even to this date we follow. For example, when the process for acetaldehyde was developed in the organic chemistry labs, uh, in order to do scale up, to some extent, of course, done at NCL, but to do real scale up, he got for the first time a process engineering company. And that company, so this brainwave of taking technologies to commercialization through a process engineering company was at that time not done. This was the first time it was done, and it was really done for two things. One is to really offer turnkey technologies, right? And this is what Indian industries typically want even today. And that turnkey also means that you have to provide guarantees and penalty clauses and all that come in, which NCL is unable to do. None of the publicly funded institutions can do, but a process engineering company can do that. So this intermediate step of making that happen, he was really instrumental in that, and NCL has been practicing it for a long time, and even today we do that. And there's an interesting anecdote in Professor Doraiswamy's book, which tells you about Dr. B.D. Tilak as a person and his very strong patriotism for the country. Hindustan Organic Chemicals at that time created a tender. They advertised a tender for technology for acetaldehyde, and B.D. Tilak wanted NCL's technology to get out there and be commercialized, and so they filed a bid for that against the tender. And there were others, multinational companies like Uday, for example, from Germany. There were a few others who also filed their bids. And HOC, of course, went through all of that. And typically the mindset is to give the technology, give the license to a company who's well established, has done these kinds of plants elsewhere in the world. But they had to go through all the bids, and they went to NCL's bid, and they wrote back to NCL with a lot of queries. This is not right, this is not right, this question, that question, a long list of questions. And Professor Venkatraman, who was the director at that time, immediately assembled a team, which of course had the additional director, Dr. B.D. Tilak, to lead that team and said, create a rebuttal. So Dr. B.D. Tilak wrote a long rejoinder and then submitted it to Professor Venkatraman for review. And Professor Venkatraman was horrified by seeing that there was a sentence in that review says, the query this is a lie. He says in the rejoinder saying this is a lie. So Professor Venkatraman says, you can't write such things. Go back and rewrite it and tone it down a little bit. Don't be so harsh and aggressive and send me back a revised version. So after a few days, the revised version came, and instead of saying this is a lie, he says this is a damn lie. So he was so patriotic and so confident about the NCL technology, and he persevered, and he made sure that the plant actually came up, and of course it was very successful. It went through the difficulties that typically happen, but all of those were sorted out, and the plant started running, and it ran for a very large number of years. And after that, there were two more such technologies that NCL commercialized for Hindustan Organic Chemicals. The chlorobenzene was one, endosulfan was another. There was one more, which was, I think, a silane. So multiple technologies came from NCL and were commercialized by HOC. And once that happened, there were many industries to which this followed. In fact, there is a map that we have come across, 1970s annual report of NCL. It's a map of India, and there are about 130 odd points on the map saying these are the places in India where NCL's technology has been commercialized, which means plants are up there and running. So this was Dr. B.D. Tilak. But of course, after his retirement, he worked for the rural empowerment. He really believed that science and technology should be used to uplift the difficulties faced in rural India, especially in tribals. He founded the Center for Application Science and Technology for Research and Development, CASTFORD as it is called. And later also he was the chairman of Forum for Science and Technology for Rural Education and Development. Under this center, he developed multiple things. One of the first hazard-free chulas, safe and efficient chulas were discovered. Also slow release urea and diammonium phosphate fertilizers were also developed in his center. He was the recipient, of course, of many awards, including the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, the P.C. Ray Award, the K.G. Naik Gold Medal, but most importantly, he was honored by Padma Bhushan by the President of India in 1972. As I said, I had the great privilege of having seen him and having a small interaction with him in 1994, I believe. And on 25th of May 1999, he left this earth for his heavenly abode. So great personality. We are very, very proud to have such a personality leading NCL for 9 years. And many of the things that he created and the processes that he set are still practiced today. And a great credit goes to him for taking NCL to where it is today and recognized in the Indian chemical industry sector as a go-to laboratory for not just excellence in science, but also translating that science into commercialized technologies. Thank you so much. Hand it over to Samir.
Thank you, Ashish, for reflecting upon the phenomenal contributions of Professor B.D. Tilak. Thank you, Ashish, for reflecting upon the phenomenal contributions of Professor B.D. Tilak. With this, I would like to invite Dr. Shivaram to introduce our speaker today, Professor Mark. Dr. Shivaram.
Thank you. Is it on? Yes. Is it on? Can you hear me? I can speak without this. Okay. Thank you, Samir, and thank you, Ashish, for reminding the legacy of NCL in terms of people like P.D. Tilak. I have interacted with him personally, and these are remarkable men who I think we should be genuinely proud of for all time to come, because they created, in my opinion, the basis for our existence today. one of the interesting things that maybe we should always mention, it's a phenomenally fundamental concept which B.D. Tilak tried to apply. Of course, he failed at that. I mean, he failed at that point of time. But I think it's a singularly important concept, and I'm sure Mark will possibly in a way resonate with this. They tried to put this surfactant monolayer on lakes to prevent evaporation of water. I think it's a significant thinking, because evaporation of water, is one of the big issues, and today we understand, I mean, is it necessary to control water evaporation from at least urban lakes? Now, this is a sustainability question, but it's something that science has addressed. And in fact, there was a gentleman called, I know, is Professor Dr. Katti, here. He was actually one of the finest surfactant physical chemist, and Dr. Katti, his son is today in IIT Kanpur, heading the bio, now he's IIT Goa, right? Okay, he's a director of IIT Goa, and I knew his son too. And, they tried to spread this surfactant, on the surface of a lake, Pashan Lake, okay? I mean, they first did all the experimentation in the lab, and they went there, and they tried to kind of create a monolayer. And in order to see that whether that will reduce the evaporation of water. Now, this was actually a macro, what we now called, what is called engineering, the engineering on a large scale, which is, I don't know, there's a word for this, geoengineering. It's an engineering on a large scale. So they did all the lab experiments here. They proved that it can actually reduce the, evaporation of water, and they had the audacity to go and try it out, in the lake. Now, it was difficult, of course, to get the data reliably on the lake, and of course, the interest waned. But I think it is still an important solution that even today, when I think about that problem that they looked at that time, I think they were very much ahead of the time. Water, it was not such a difficult problem in 1985, when they did these experiments, I mean, I'm sorry, 1980s, when they did these experiments. But maybe we need to revisit these experiments again, maybe it's important. Okay, before I don't want to stand between you and you have the time, okay, don't worry about it. You will have the time. We have taken some extra time from the thing, you have the time. Nice to introduce, welcome Mark to NCL. I had a very chance encounter with him some years ago, and we kind of, in a way, we related to each other's thinking, and I think we became, to some extent, a mutual admiration, in the process. I met him, I think in 2021 or 22, I forget now, in one of the Vinyl Asia conferences, which I normally attend every year. He has come for the same conference, which is going to be held this weekend. Unfortunately, I have a conflict, and therefore I am not going. I used to speak regularly at this meeting on the PVC, and once I was talking about some papers and some data, and I didn't realize that, I mean, I cited his work, but I didn't realize he was sitting in the audience, because I never met him before, And then he came back and introduced himself to me, that I am this Mark Everard that you are now mentioning in that paper. And that set off a very nice relationship, which we have maintained with email and other things in the last few years. Mark is a very interesting personality. He is a prolific author. I don't know how many books he has written. Many of them have been translated into many languages across diverse areas of, I think he has talked about essentially water, and wetlands. He has talked about fishes extensively. And of course, he has talked about plastics, especially PVC. So it's a very wide canvas of a rich tapestry of topics, but all tied into this concept of sustainable development goals. And that's the unifying principle that he brings in. I have read many of his papers. I have read one of his books that he was nice enough to send me, you know, and one of the very important contribution was that he was part of a non-governmental organization. This is called the Natural Step, and this was created in the late 90s when PVC was a whipping boy, because everybody said PVC should be banned, you know, in the world. And there was a huge Greenpeace movement in Europe about the hazards of PVC and the ability to safely dispose of end-of-life PVC. So there was an NGO, and Mark was a part of this. It's called the Natural Step, the TNS, and they did a lot of detailed studies, and I think its credit goes to him, that for the first time they brought in what is called science-based, you know, understanding of this entire PVC value chain. And then this entire study of TNS, TNS was taken over by the European Vinyl Society, which is called the Vinyl Plus, and they voluntarily, you know, kind of started implementing many of the ideas that the TNS proposed. And this is one of the rare cases where the industry voluntarily stepped up and said, we will listen to these kind of issues and we will start self-regulating ourselves. And the PVC industry in Europe, in a way, was reborn as a result of that to some extent. Otherwise, PVC industry was subject to a lot of negative publicity. And I think that was the time when I was extensively looking at this, the kind of this way of communicating the goodness of materials in the context of course, the problems that they face. And I think TNS did a magnificent job, in my opinion. That kind of an advocacy is important because we can't throw, in my opinion, the baby with the bath water. You know, I think we need to understand both. Bath water is dirty, but the baby is also pretty, pretty, and we need to take care of both. And that's the message that they gave. I think his work brings in, and for those of you who are young here and who are likely to pursue research in your life in the future, you know, his work brings in what I call the interdependence of social and economic progress within the constraints of what is called natural capital, you know, because natural capital is very scarce. You know, we don't have abundance in nature. You know, in fact, this is a misnomer to think that nature is abundant. Nature is not abundant. You know, nature is limiting, and within that limiting aspect of a nature, how do we create, you know, progress, economic progress, and how do we create social progress? And I think that's what Mark has been addressing through a variety of studies and writing and books. I think it's a very nice way of looking at things. How do these challenges provide opportunities for innovation? That's again the question that he asks, you know, because normally we think that these kinds of constraints in a way limit innovation, you know, but he tries to argue in some of his work that no, they actually provide opportunities for innovation, and therefore we need to look for those new ideas. You know, that's what I said. For young people, the message is, let's not get, you know, I know there are lots of issues and problems in the society, but let's not get negative about it. There is a positivity in that. That is, there is an opportunity to seek innovation to resolve some of this. And in fact, I teach a course, and I mentioned this, that this is very important. And I also, he also calls what is called in his papers, which is very, very perceptive, is called the aspirational half of the concept of sustainable development, which is a very important thinking process of what is called this aspirational half of the sustainable development goals. So thank you for coming, and I think we are happy to have you here. And you know, he is not a scientist in the sense that he's not a chemist or a physicist, you know, but his understanding of science in society, I think, is a very, very expansive understanding. And I'm very glad that you asked him to give him this Tilak Memorial Lecture, because I think Tilak embodied, in my opinion, the best of science and the best of society. Thank you very much.
myself sorted out and get my remote mouse. Turn this on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Namaste, मेरा नाम मार्क एवराज है. मैंने अंग्रेजी का राष्ट्रीय वैज्ञानिक हूँ, and that's the limit of my Hindi. So you've got it, okay? This is my 29th visit to India. I've worked a lot in India with Mashli, with the Bagh, with the Pani, with the trees, the pear. I'm a complete fraud. I am not a chemist, and I'm talking to chemists. But I'm a systems scientist and an ecosystem scientist. I've got a wetland background, and going back to when the Ramsar Commission was introduced in the 70s, because yes, I'm that old, we got into the mindset that just putting barbed wire around areas was not conservation. They were socio-ecological systems. And if we treated them as anything other than a mix of society and economy and ecology, then we weren't conserving them. And when the world got interested in sustainability, a lot of us wetland scientists branched into all sorts of areas where we don't claim primary expertise, but as systems thinkers, hopefully we can add intelligence. So that's a little bit about the background, and I'm very honoured to be invited to speak at the Professor Tilak Memorial, so thank you very much for that. I mentioned, this is a sort of a roadmap of what I'm going to cover, but tomorrow can't be like today. In the 60s, when I watched the moon landing live, it was an era when we were told that energy would be too cheap to meter with the nuclear reactors. And by the millennium, we'd all be in flying cars and have all leisure, and there wouldn't be any congestion or pollution, obviously, and we'd be eating protein pills rather than the lovely Indian food that I like so much. But of course, another thing that happened in the 60s was we became aware through the Minamata crisis, Silent Spring, that pollutants, they don't just go away, they come back. We are deeply connected with ecosystems, and major tanker disaster, the Torrey Canyon in the 60s, really polarized my perception of the vulnerability of the world. And of course, since then, we've become aware it's not just what we make and how we make it, it's not industry's fault, the world, the chemical industry's fault. There's a whole life cycle, and we're sitting on products, and we're breathing products, and we're wearing products. So the chemical industry is a societal phenomenon. It's not just what industry does, and we can't just point the industry at the finger at industry. And of course, now we are aware of all of these runaway trends. You'll be aware of the famous hockey stick example of climate change, carbon emissions, deforestation, soil loss, species loss. And we live in a world of vast population and growing population, 8.3 billion of us, rising to 10.5 billion probably after 2050, with dwindling resources. So we don't live in that idyllic world of energy too cheap to meter, nice clean countryside to go in our automatic cars and all the rest of it. We do live in a world that operates by specific rules of physics and chemistry that lead to material cycling and being precipitated, that's formed the structure of the Earth we're walking on right now. And that process was amplified massively by the emergence of life 3.8 billion years ago, and powered by photosynthesis 2.5 billion years ago. Nature goes in cycles, and we are part of nature. And in our early evolution, we live within the carrying capacity. And even when we went through the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, our impact might have been local, but it wasn't global. We were still largely living within carrying capacity over hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, over a course of centuries, we've innovated other stuff. So we've made it a little bit more complicated, to say the least. Why did we do that? It's not because we ran out of stones. There's big hills all around Pune. You can go and look at them right now. There's plenty of stones. It's just the spirit of humanity is always to innovate, always to move forward. always to find better substances to meet our needs. And that's a strand I'll be returning to later in my talk. But of course, with the industrialized era of humanity, not only have our numbers boomed massively, but we've over-harvested from nature and mined from the ground. And that is the root cause, essentially, of the runaway problems that are facing us today, and particularly you younger people. You know, the world we've left you is not a green and pleasant land. You have some serious challenges to face. We haven't stood idly by. I mean, I was in the government sector in the UK for 22 years, and we try to do things, and all across the world there's regulations. The first industrial regulation, the UK Alkali Act 1863, but there's others, India, Australia, America, and so forth. And we've implemented tools that you'll be well aware of: life cycle assessment, environmental product declarations, product environmental footprints, and so forth. What we've done, though, is focused on the bad stuff. Like automatic in our head, chemicals are bad, let's look at the bad, 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 bad. Okay? So that's how we've approached regulation, because when pernicious problems have emerged, we've tried to stamp on them, which has created a false dichotomy that there are good materials and there are bad materials. So let's look at some of the nice, safe ones. Nitrogen, inert as a molecular gas. Oxygen, essential. Anyone here scuba dive? Nitrogen turns into a narcotic at a certain depth. My wife goes completely space crazy if we dive below a certain depth. And people die because they effectively get drunk at depth. Oxygen, instantly neurologically toxic. So when you're diving enriched oxygen, you have to be really careful. Oxygen's a killer. It's lethal. That's before we get into free radicals even. So is it safe? Is it benign? Is it automatically wonderful? No, it's not. Context is everything. Bad stuff. Hydrochloric acid, ozone. You don't want to put it on your chapati, you know? Bad things would happen. And yet each of us is producing hydrochloric acid in our stomachs now at a pH of 1.5 to 3.5. It does its process, it's resorbed. Is that a bad chemical? Because we couldn't really function without it. And ozone, of course, you don't want to breathe it in, but where would we be without it? We'd be burnt by cosmic rays and wavelengths of ultraviolet. So context is king, context is everything. And the old mantra of risk equals hazard times exposure is largely lost on the way we regulate chemistry. There's a very lazy morph towards hazard, which doesn't help us. In the US particular, there's this sort of sense that bio-based is a get out of jail card. But you know, I work in agriculture as well, and agriculture is the biggest driver of biodiversity and habitat loss globally, accounts for 70% of water extraction, is the main driver of soil degradation, is a big emitter of carbon dioxide. Farmed chemicals compete with food, and of course many organic farm-based polymers are not recyclable. So is that a panacea? Risk, context is everything, and all dimensions of the life cycle matter. You don't just look at one little bit and think that everything is wonderful. And it's funny, sometimes us in the green movement, if I can put it that way, said, are you trying to drive us back to the Stone Age? You know, no, I'm not. Why not? Silicosis, rock dust is emerging as a big problem. It's a Category 1 International Agency of Research on Cancer proven carcinogen. So I wouldn't drive you back to the Stone Age because I don't want you to get silicosis. Likewise, wood dust. Context is everything. And spoiler alert, there's no such thing as a sustainable material. It's just simply not the case. And so much regulatory and particularly NGO activity just lives on this simple view that there's good stuff and bad stuff. I mean, water is essential, but the amount of drownings globally, I rest my case. So look, humanity and material use, we've run through that one. I'm going to talk about refocusing ourselves about human needs now. And Dr. Sivaram has touched on some of this already. In 1987, we globally signed up to the Brundtland definition of sustainable development, which many of us know absolutely by heart. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that was endorsed at the Rio Earth Summit. We agreed globally that that was where we needed to go. What did we do? We used our supporting tools, which are all about the bad stuff. And we forgot about the meeting of needs. Let's do the same thing but punish a few chemicals effectively. Where are the tools that focus on the meeting of needs in the most efficient and safe way? It's a complete paradigm shift, a way of looking at the world. Because we innovate not to cause harm. You know, when I was in the NGO world, you know, the chemical dudes, the chemical industry were bad guys, and then, you know, have a few beers with them, you realise that they're actually quite nice people, and they're trying to do good. We don't innovate to cause harm, and yet we regulate as if that were the case. So a bit about needs. I'm not going to talk about this a lot, but this is the good old Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs that I'm sure you'll be familiar with. Starting at the bottom, if you can't eat and you can't drink, then your higher levels of need are not going to be met. When you've got all that lot, life can be improved. Manfred Max Neef added this idea that all needs have satisfiers. We need institutions, we need things, we need tools to meet those needs. And of course, we live in a material world, and because of that, we need stuff to meet those needs. So it's a better way of looking at the world, in my view, because tomorrow can't be like today, but the needs will exist. As long as there are people, and we're not short of them at the moment, the needs will exist. So the question turns, the needs question is, how can we profitably meet tomorrow's societal needs? Safely, efficiently. It's an innovation way of thinking rather than what can we produce that's less toxic than yesterday. And yes, you mentioned the lost half of sustainable development. Jim Longhurst, my colleague, and I produced this paper. Jim's an air quality scientist, so he did a load on air quality. I looked at catchment management and the European PVC commitment aimed at meeting needs better. And it is literally a missing half of sustainable development, an innovative way of thinking, rather than trying to be less rubbish tomorrow than you were yesterday, which is the negative way. So, you know, with the sustainable development goals, they're all about meeting needs, environmental and social needs. Ultimately, the world has kind of come back to this consensus view that we need to think about meeting needs. Let's think about PVC stabilizers as an example. Do we produce them because we want to kill children? No, we don't. We want the plastic to be delivering human needs for a long time. That's why we innovate them. And longevity is a big contributor to sustainability. So running the SDGs across PVC stabilizers, they can help us with water, SDG 6, sustainable cities, SDG 11, responsible consumption and production, and you can read them all there. What other materials do it as well or better? That's an interesting question. These are positive stories, and these are stimuli for innovation and a way to sell the benefits of chemistry. PVC in this context does some things very well, and other stuff it doesn't do well. So let's just get over the idea that there's good materials and bad materials. There's context, and the context absolutely matters. So moving from the bad stuff to the good stuff, you actually need both sides of the coin. It's not as if you can run away with this meets needs but accidentally kills half the population. I mean, that's not a great sell from a marketing point of view, is it? But PVC products offer you longevity, so more benefit or need per unit of material. low or no inputs in use. The window frame in my study I put in 32 years ago. I've not even cleaned it. That's because I'm lazy. But no biocides have gone into it, as if it were wood. And it's inherently recyclable, mechanically recyclable. So how do other materials compare against those metrics? Another of the approaches very relevant to sustainability is backcasting. So I'm coming to Pune. I didn't say it's not in Ireland, so I'll head that way. I'll head east and I'll hope I'll end up in India. I mean, it's logical, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't do that. I thought, how do I get to Pune? And yet with chemistry, we ask the, it's not in Ireland, let's go in another direction question. So with pesticides, you know, we used to use arsenic on crops and suddenly realized arsenic was not so great. So we morphed to methyl bromide, which is an ozone depleter, Montreal Protocol. We moved to organophosphates, neurological problems. We moved to organochlorides, persistence and bioaccumulation. We moved to synthetic pyrethroids, kind of accidentally kills everything, not the target organism. We moved to neonicotinoids, and we are realizing that they are a major biological threat now. So if we're on this endless carousel of trying not to be like we were yesterday, we're going to be repeating the same thing that we've repeated for 50 years. And that blinds us to thinking about good old rotational agriculture, biological control, solarization. We need to think about where we need to end up. That is goal-oriented thinking. We need a way to navigate to a very different future. And that's very important from a sustainability point of view, because the world operates in distinct ways. It's cyclic. We've visited this one before. This at a time when, of all the mammalian biomass on Earth, 96% is human or livestock. Only 4% is wild mammal. And that's a terrifying statistic. 70% of bird biomass on Earth is poultry. 30% is wild. And we can run the metric over water, climate, air quality, extent of green cover and so forth. And we live in dangerous times, particularly with a 3.8 billion population rising and a rising average per capita consumption as well. It's a product of successful development programs that we are hungrier than we were before, on average. So we're in this funnel. It's a very natural step type language, this. We live in this funnel, but somewhere we're being squeezed by resource constraints and what we can't do yesterday because of problems have emerged. But somewhere in the middle here are the rules of the natural world, the principles governing the natural world that determine what is sustainable and what isn't. So far better to backcast, to say that is a target. We need to be guided by the carrying capacity and the functions of the ecosystems we live within. We know that slavery from a social point of view, asbestos from a material point of view, are what we call hit the walls of the funnel. We don't condone them anymore, even if modern slavery is probably more pervasive now than old-fashioned slavery. Issues of carbon intensity, water limitation, social equity are beginning to shape the way we think about things. And in the PVC sector, lead, cadmium, DEHP as additives, and fugitive VCMs are things we've grappled with and largely dealt with in the industry over the years. And this is thinking is sort of guided by the natural step approach. I don't have time to go into that. If anyone wants to talk about that, I'm happy to outside of the presentation. But essentially is a systems model of how the biosphere operates based on non-contentious principles of thermodynamics, etc., which helps us then say what are the system conditions, what are the things that we mustn't do if we want to achieve a sustainable world. And that's the model I used when I was invited to do a study on PVC. There was a very, very private meeting in 1999 in London. The two directors of the two then PVC companies said, do we have a place in the future? We need to know this. If we don't, we'll sell up. We'll go and make, I don't know, chapatis or something. I don't know, whatever. And very seriously, they were seeing this funnel. do we have a place in the future? And the second question was, well, really, if we do have a place in the future, what have we got to do? And from that study, I developed the 5 TNS sustainability challenges for PVC that went on to be adopted across the European industry as a voluntary commitment. And they're still there today. Importantly, looking also at PVC or any other material as a system, because wherever a problem arises, the whole industrial chain, the whole life cycle is impacted. So it's not as if the retailers would say, well, the industry can sort that out because people wouldn't buy. It's not as if, you know, there was a problem additive. Well, we'll kind of ignore that. That's the chemical industry, and then you can't recycle. So we need to think across whole life cycles. And under the natural step tools, what we've done in Europe is put the system conditions against the life cycle stages in a structured framework, and that helps you identify where your problems are. You might have more poor mining practices. In the chemical side, you might have a knowledge gap in terms of the physical impacts on nature, or the compounding stage in terms of the social impacts. But equally, where are the strengths? Where are the meeting of needs? Where are the greens? Where are the positives? You've got an ethical sourcing policy. You've dealt with that one. You've designed it so that you can close the loop chemically. So that's a plus. It provides longevity in use without maintenance inputs. That's a plus. Value recovery at end of life. So we've got the tools to begin to think about things like this. And, you know, my involvement with the PVC industry over 26 years has been really sort of quite an interesting journey for what is basically a fish hugger to be working in the real world. Now, if we just stopped at PVC, all we'd be doing is ghettoizing PVC. So I confessed in a paper I'd written 20 years on that the wording of the 5 challenges for PVC were deliberately generic to all materials. And I didn't tell anyone that for 20 years. So my next mission really was this seeking the level playing field. Let's look at the foundational principles of meeting needs safely and efficiently. And there's a bunch of things. All dimensions of sustainable development, not just the chemistry, not just that in isolation. Defensibly science-based, full article life cycle, full product life cycle, looks at positive contributions as well as negative, open access in principle, ideally free to use, applicable across product and material types, ideally statutory, and tested through peer review. And another paper that is linked there, it's free downloadable. I'm not expecting to read that, but I looked at a bunch of chemical tools in wide use around the world, put them against those principles, and there's an awful lot of red in there. I don't intend to go through everything there. Interesting, ASF, the tool I showed you that we designed for PVC, we designed it with these principles in mind. The only red there is it's not statutory. Very few of the tools look at all dimensions of sustainability. A lot of them are chemically focused alone, and so forth. I mean, I don't intend to go into that in massive detail. But running that tool across a range of products, obviously PVC, calcium zinc stabilizers, it shows up hotspots and positives. But the same is true of brovinated flame retardants in polyolefins, of biocides in wood, you know, that lovely sustainable material that rots quickly. Covered in biocides, you can't recycle it. Likewise, cobalt additives in solar panels, which have big supply chain issues amongst others. So with PVC, there is in Europe a product label which audits that certain practices relating to the system conditions have been followed. But we need to think more globally. We live with global supply chains. Despite what Donald Trump's trying to do, the problems of the world are still truly global. So we need to think globally and act globally. We live in the age of plastics. Plastics have been very much in the news, and there's been a lot of simple messaging. Plastic stuff's bad. We must get out of plastics. This is one of my favorite ones from Bhopal Airport when I was going through it. Oh, my battery's running low. Your battery's running low. It's not my computer. Hold on. Avoid plastic, save Earth. You got it? Printed on a PVC sheet. And I've got photos from Karnataka and a few other places like that. So society doesn't understand plastics and doesn't understand how plastic helps it meet its needs, which it does. I mean, you know, healthcare. I had major surgery 2 years ago, and I've got photos of me with PVC out of, well, every orifice, literally, and some orifices that they made with scalpels. I wouldn't be with you without those products, simple as. So I'm sort of quite grateful for that fact. But my mobile phone and, you know, all the other stuff we do, we wouldn't live in the modern world because we've innovated these materials to meet needs. That doesn't give us a get-out-of-jail card because PVC does other things very badly, like, you know, short-life food applications particularly, where contamination is inevitable and breakdown in a landfill might take 750,000 years or something. So horses for courses, the meeting of needs. So there's an urgent need to think in level playing field terms. Why? Because it helps us make wise choices. It helps us work out how to meet needs optimally. It guides our innovation. It's not as if the bad things don't exist. We've got to deal with them, but equally we can innovate for longevity, for delivering needs safely and efficiently, future risk management and profitability. And this is the book that you mentioned, Seeking Sustainable Development on a Level Playing Field, a PVC case study. I was deliberately trying to move away from PVC on this one because this is the way we need to think about material use generically. Now the last sort of strand of what I'm going to talk about is where I'm taking the thinking next. Because we're all barely human. You were aware of this. 1 in 4 of the cells in all of our bodies is human. 3 out of 4 are microbial. And that's vital. We wouldn't be able to live without the endocrine, the immuno, and the neurological, very deep interactions they have. And a lot of modern health issues it's emerging are because we don't live with our symbionts very well. You know, the food we eat acts as a sort of toxin. We're aware that we live in a world that is symbiotic. We need the whole functioning of the ecosystem. We're just not very good at recognizing that our lifestyles and our industries and the aspects of the modern world are also part of that socio-ecological system. That's a fundamental way of thinking about where sustainability needs to go. How does it synchronize with the supportive capacities of the world? And then in the context of chemicals, also, we tend to think of chemicals as, well, that's what the chemical sector does. And yet we're wearing chemicals and we're eating chemicals and we're sitting on chemicals. And everywhere in that life cycle is social. And there's a social symbiosis. And if we kind of say, well, that's a problem for the regulator and that's a problem for industry, we abrogate responsibility for what we do, then we imagine that we can function as a society on our own. This is a new book coming out in production at the moment, and that's the graphic on the cover. The way I think about it, because I've worked in all 4 sectors of society, business, the statutory sector, the voluntary sector, and the knowledge-providing sector, what I've seen over the years is a frustrating wastage of effort. The voluntary sector and the statutory sector have come from this bottom-up, you know, this is bad, let's ban this. This is also bad, let's ban that sort of mindset. It puts business in the being less bad fold. They're trying to run away from that. And defensive rather than innovative. And the knowledge providers often have focused on detail, which is still necessary, but it's not maybe helpful because it kind of feels like a boxing ring at times. You know, having worked across those sectors, everyone's fighting each other. And all this wonderful creative energy is going to interactions that are not helpful, not driving forward. Divisive fragmentation of energies and investments. And yet we've all signed up to this idea of sustainability, that we need to meet needs now that work for the future, to do things safely and sustainable for tomorrow. So what we've said is we all agree to where we need to end up, but the energy is not going there at the moment, and I find that really frustrating. If we could agree that we need to put our energies into the goal that is not attainable today generally, then the world profoundly changes. All that energy goes to symbiosis. All those sectors mesh creatively and positively, rather than fighting each other. How does that work? What does it look like? Well, from an industry point of view, from a private sector point of view, voluntary commitments to goals, a bit like the PVC in industry case study. Here are our goals. We can't get to nirvana tomorrow, but we can make interim goals linked to the targets. The regulatory response, yes, there's still bad guys. We still need to give them a good kicking. But are we making the promised goal progress we said towards those goals? So regulation moves more towards verification than it does to punishment. The NGO or the voluntary sector, yeah, we still need them to kick the bad guys. But how can they talk to regulators to say, oh, this regulation that was put in place in 1992, I'm thinking of some of the international export of waste international protocols, is now obstructing the cyclic economy. So regulators, get your act together, and also encourage progress, recognise progress, help progress spread across sectors. Moving into a very much a progressive. And then this last one, the knowledge providers. Yes, we still need to advise on detail, of course we do, but we need to help people with systemic framings, not detailed framings, and to produce the professionals that think in systemic terms. That's you guys at the back, yeah? To think in systems terms, not detailed terms alone. And that's what it looks like, and we've got some of it. We've not got a lot of the bit in the middle, frankly. And I just want, it sounds a bit like hippie-ish, which is not surprising given my background, but we need to hold hands and love each other and say we need to get to the same place. Forgive me, I am an aging hippie, but it is quite literally true. If we drew a graph of what was good as a basis for backcasting versus what's a good basis for societal consensus building, then there's a nice line here of increasing symbiosis. If we can backcast together and have consensus that there's consensual goals, terrific. Bottom-up regulation is right down the bottom here. We just need enough consensus to get it regulated, and it's not a basis for backcasting. It's about stopping doing what we did yesterday. Triple bottom line, great concept, really difficult to do anything about, subject to interpretation. So consensus high, basis for backcasting low. Phase out of petrochemical cars, well, everyone's backtracking on that now, but that's get out of yesterday's tech. If we reframe it as achievement of net zero, it gives headroom for innovation. It doesn't necessarily, we might have petrochemical cars in future with synthetic fuels and all the rest of it. You're not saying this is bad, you're sort of saying this is a goal. And so it goes, the natural step, 5 challenges for PVC are there. The Australian ending plastic pollution, I was talking to the government in Oz in November about that. They've kind of said, this is the goal, this is where we need to get to. Everyone's got a role in it, we don't know what your roles are, but, and they're trying to do a backcast from it. The level playing field idea is obviously highly consensual, circular economy strategies, and I've got the UN SDG goals at the end there, not because they're perfect, but because they're about the closest the world has ever got to consensus about where we need to end up. So, yeah, pretty good. We need to get all sectors on board. We need to co-create visions. We need to downscale it as well. What does it mean for you at home? What does it mean for you in your business? What does it mean for you as a research institute? But it's a different way of looking at the world. And really, sort of coming towards the end, those 5 challenges, they've served the European industry really well. And the European industry has retained me over the quarter century since I published them to help them to be a critical friend. And the place I'm trying to be a critical friend is a little bit difficult, is to say, well, that was a quarter of a century ago, guys. And the world has moved on. And now suddenly, regulators are talking about carbon neutrality, circularity, looking at all additives, regardless of whether there are known problems, persistent organic compounds, joining up the value chain. The backcast won us headroom of a quarter century of doing good things, and the NGOs don't attack that sector as vociferously, and regulators give them a lighter journey. But guess what? The world has moved on. So we need a new vision of voluntary commitment. Visioning is something that's not fit and forget. Vision is something that we keep adapting as the world catches up. My final slide is really for the PVC conference, but yeah, it's not all doom and gloom, I think, is the message on this one. We know that we live in dangerous times, and we're being sort of compressed and crushed with issues that we've dealt with in the past and emerging issues like microplastics. But if we understand that the world operates in particular ways and we backcast from that rather than try to get out of the bad stuff that we did yesterday, then there is a bright green hinterland beyond. And that hinterland is, if we can innovate for efficiency, for safety, then we've also got profitability. For business, there is a green hinterland. We've got the tools to be material blind about things. We have the capacity to join up societal sectors. Really difficult, but we have the capacity. And for PVC, it can choose to be there or not, and you could substitute any material there. Do you want a place at the table of the future? If so, innovate. If you don't, go, no, the world will stop changing. It won't. And with that, that's my Dr. Tilak lecture finished. And I really am open to questions, because I'd rather converse than make it one way.
Thank you, Mark, for enlightening us with what is bad, what is good is not so good, and everything is contextual.
Hello.
So this, the session is open for questions.
Hello.
So Mark, today if you put academics, industry, regulators, and an NGO in a room and close the doors, nobody will probably come out. They'll all kill each other. How do you build consensus?
I think
because they are at each other's throats, and that's all they do.
They are at each other's throats. Now, I mean, it's learn by doing, I think, is the message. The lead guy on the anti-PVC stuff globally and I were undergrads and postgrads together. We were both guitarists in the same band as well. We know each other, and we still see each other. And don't tell him this, but he's just put PVC guttering on his house. Greenpeace is never going to admit they got it wrong, because their corporate position is that. But there's sort of a tacit admission that the world is a little bit more complicated than it was when they established that position. And essentially, the Greenpeace position goes back to their first success being with nerve agents, organochlorides. And then the next biggest success was organochloride pesticides. And then they kind of said, well, what else has got chlorine in? So it's a sort of a lazy trajectory. I've had this conversation, obviously confidentially, with Greenpeace. But what the European industry has done on PVC has got the regulators and the NGOs off their back. It's not yet a cosy shake hands and buy each other a drink type of relationship, but it's not as hostile as it was. That they're off doing their other things. As I say, I worked for 22 years in the public sector in UK and some intergovernmental organisations, and yeah, these bodies have their cultures, and if the culture of the success is based on punish, 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 it's very difficult. And I think, honestly, in that sector, you're looking for people to retire because your reputation, professional reputation, is built on that. And the new generation, you guys, will go into those four sectors and think differently. And it's a generational thing. I mean, my generation is fairly narrow thinking, to be quite honest. Most of it's a difficult one. There isn't a magic formula here, but success is the way to go, to see how the industry has been able to thrive in the face of wipeout, which was literally the case, and the regulators backed off and all the rest of it. And in the research sector, move everything to systems thinking. Be specialists still, but specialists within a systems framework.
So my leads to my second question, which is you talked about next generation systems level. Do we really train our students to think like that in our current education system? Dr. Shivram gave a wonderful talk recently, but we don't seem to be doing that.
No, it's a global phenomenon as well. I have a problem with systems thinking because the systems journals have now moved towards the systems model, whereas I do systems thinking because I want to systems think. I don't want to promote a model. So even the systems world has got very non-systems. And it's difficult. It's a total culture change from the world that we grew up in. Sustainable economics is an interesting one. You know, if I gave you 100 rupees and I came back a year later and said, where's my 50%? Where's my 150 rupees? If I go to the bank and they give me my 50 rupees and it's not dripping with blood, and yet the investment that's been necessary has an environmental and social footprint, and the economy completely isolates us from that. And that's how deep the divisions are in society about what is systemic and what is simply, siloed. Yeah, absolutely. Right across the world, really, it's a huge battle to move systems thinking forward. Yeah, I wish there was a magic bullet on that one, but we are all part of the magic bullet, I guess, because, we go out. I often say to people, particularly younger people, do you realize how much power you've got? Because every decision you make when you buy something, every conversation you have socially or with your family or whatever, you never know where the ripples are going to end up. And I've had some sort of interesting examples in my life where, this thing that you said, well, for example, at the BBC conference pre-COVID, and suddenly I'm here. You don't know where the ripple is going to go. But the world changes because people change. People want change. And I'm trying to make some big ripples in the UK at the moment about geopolitics, which I can talk about because I'm disgusted by what I see in the world and I'm not going to sit by them. But then I've got a bigger mouth, okay, because I'm in the media and all the rest of it. But we all of us have more influence than we believe that we have. It's one of the things I take from my experience of Hinduism, and I'm not Hindu. I'm half Japanese, so I've got a little bit of Shinto, and the animist religions say you don't live a crappy life and then on Sundays you go and pray to an idol, They say that Brahmin is in everything, and it's what we do. And this is true. Everything we do has ripples, has influence, can change the world for the better. And why wouldn't we do that? So that's a really convoluted answer. Probably nothing to do with the question.
Very nice talk, Professor Mark. You took us to a very different world, by the way. So my question is most of the questions that we are asking, particularly the last circle you said knowledge-based. So most of the questions are human-centric.
Yes.
And I feel that if you want to take a consideration of systems approach, we need to understand, or we need to have questions which are more of a nature centric. And that's something, I mean, I will say severely lacking in the modern era, or maybe in industrialization. That's one of the biggest challenge I feel personally, being a
Yeah.
biologist.
Well,
Because one on hand we want to save Earth, but Earth we don't have to save. I mean, Earth
well,
knows
the
how
Earth's
to save.
fine. It can do fine without us. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I skipped over the nature stuff. I mean, if I was giving this presentation, as I did in might have been 2019 or even 2018, I can't remember. I was all about how the system conditions work and the interactions chemically and biologically and all the rest of it. That's my background, but it's just where my mind is now, as I've emphasized the social side of things. But yes, everything we do has a systemic interaction with species, chemistry, physics, just as it has socially. And you're absolutely right. We need to think about all the interactions we have with nature as a system, physical, chemical
Because
biology.
in the area that I work, there was a lot talked about integrated pest management.
Yes.
But then ultimately it becomes more of integrated pesticide management. Nothing
Yes.
like actually the pest. I mean, that ecological thinking or environmental thinking, because in nature, if you compare agricultural crop plants versus other plants, they are surviving without anything, without artificial conditions like irrigation or pesticides also. So there is a lot to learn from these plants and understand and use it in our agriculture. That's what I feel that, I mean, the questions are very right, but the way we are approaching, sometimes it's too much other factors influence this. And
Yeah, I mentioned I was working in Australia. I've worked in Australia a few times, and going back a good few years now, probably 25 years, there was this light bulb moment in Australia that European farming systems don't work here. Did you know if we graze kangaroos, it doesn't damage the sward? Yeah, well, obviously they evolved there. But right across the world, the green revolution was in basically Europe and America. And we've replicated that model across the world. And frankly, it doesn't work in every place. In Australia, I mean, farmers tell me, you expect to get a crop every year? You know, one year in 4 we'll have a good crop, and then we'll lose crops for 2 years and maybe get a bad one. That's because you're using our system, not what the landscape's telling you. So tuning everything towards the carrying capacity of the ecosystem is absolutely vital. Natural pollinators, natural pest predators, and all the rest of it. We're just a bit dumb, aren't we, as a species, really? Hello.
Thank you, sir, for your nice talk. So I have one doubt. So can you explain what is the present status of the maximum carrying capacity in terms of the global sustainability?
Well, that's a nice, easy question.
Have we already beyond the maximum carrying capacity, or we are within this thing as you are talking about the global level sustainability?
Yeah. We are well beyond global carrying capacity. We're consuming more or less 1.7 Earths every year, and there's only one Earth. So we're mining down, which means that what my generation has consumed blights yours. In short, we are investing in your misery, basically. Now, that assumes that the way we meet our needs today is the right way to do it. But if we can farm more benignly, if we can build materials that are more renewable, if we increase our recycling, then the footprint goes down. So there's not a linear answer to that question. It needs innovation across every sector to reduce our footprint, to be more efficient, to meet needs more safely and efficiently. It's one of my sort of little phrases that trips off the tongue. And if we did that, then we have capacity. I can't tell you exactly what the total global capacity is, but I can tell you we're vastly exceeding it today because of the way we live. And that is a challenge for the next generation, because the world you'll inhabit isn't just the world that has to be, it's the world that you will change. Because we've done our bit, but we've not left you a better world. You know, there's 3 times as many people on the planet as when I was born, and the world's carrying capacity is immeasurably decreased through soil degradation and water pressures and biodiversity, forest cover, marine fisheries, health and so forth. But who's going to make that better? It's you guys. Think differently, do differently, and the carrying capacity can increase. One of my other books actually is called Rebuilding the Earth, because that's what we have to do. The carrying capacity of the Earth is, if it's that much, because it used to be that much, then we've halved its ability to meet our needs. And if we continue that trajectory, it will go like that. But regenerative farming, producing materials that are cyclic, that don't continually decrement, and also maybe bio-based, but with regenerative forestry, literally rebuilding the earth is what we have to do to give you guys at the back, you younger guys at the back, a decent future. Don't assume that the world is static. A lot of sustainable development thinking is based on treading lighter on the earth, as if the earth was static. It's not. The earth's on a slide. We have to rebuild. So that's a bit of a long answer, but we have to turn regenerative in the way we build cities, deal with our water management, deal with our food production, deal with our chemical use.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Sir, I have one question. That what do you think that which is most which is most what we can say, misunderstood ecological aspect that public should know?
Okay. I think that the world isn't, let me try and phrase this positively rather than negatively. The misnomer that somehow nature is always going to be there. You know, you turn on a nature program and animals and plants and things are in abundance. The reality is the decimation of nature in my lifetime has been dramatic. And that's not just altruism, that is to do with total carrying capacity, air quality, you know, processing of nutrients, carbon, all of these things. Nature does those things. We absolutely need nature. And to see ourselves as part of nature as well is a fundamental, that if we harm nature, we harm ourselves. Because it is that generates the processes that maintain all of the ecosystem services, all the life support systems that our well-being and our future depends. So nature is not abundant, nature is finite, nature is fragile, and so are we, because we thrive or fall with it.
One more question from Ashish. Mark,
Oh, hello.
So as you said, we have to rebuild the world,
Yes.
rebuild the earth. Now, there are no easy solutions to this. Nobody knows the answer.
No.
So as we innovate, we are going to make big mistakes,
Yep.
right? One example in recent times has been, perhaps I don't know enough about it, but maybe, you know, organic farming in Sri Lanka, right? Probably an experiment at a country level, but in everybody's understanding today, a failed experiment. So we're going to have to do many experiments like this,
Yeah, we are.
and many of those will fail. Are we learning from it? Is Sri Lanka, for example, going to go back to say, we will still do organic farming, but not this way because that probably failed? So what are the guiding lights for these? Do we have enough patience to innovate and do these experiments, knowing that they're going to fail? Many of them will fail.
I mean, part of the guiding light was in your first sentence, because you said we don't know. So many projects, you know, get funded and they never get audited, did it work? Fit and forget, because no one wants to admit that it didn't work. And actually saying we don't know is a good backcasting position. We know there are problems, we don't know quite what the solutions are, but we need to innovate. And if we innovate, we're going to fail and we're going to succeed. I don't think we really have the capacity to, at the moment in place, to be a learning society and to say this worked in this locality and this didn't work in that locality. So maybe that's a big innovation to audit what works and what doesn't. Yeah, difficult question to answer, but we don't have all the answers. And to admit that we don't have all the answers might offend the pride of, our wondrous civic leaders and all the rest of it. But if we're genuinely backcasting, thinking about a very different future, and it can't be the same as today, then we have to give ourselves room to get things wrong, rather than to carry on blindly as if yesterday's norms will get us through to tomorrow.
I just have a small comment. I debate that nature is not fragile, nature is robust. So what nature you consider, that's the term that...
Yeah, nature is robust and fragile at the same time, basically.
When you say it's fragile, I don't think...
Yeah. It has finite limits, certainly. Hello.
So do you think globalization is one of the major obstacle in achieving sustainability? Because we are always driven by someone else's so-called success and at times try to copy that, whether it's suitable for us or not, without thinking. And if we don't, then if they are ahead of us in technology, we always have that fear that they will conquer us, right? So,
Well, we've got a live experiment at the moment, haven't we, there is a certain spray-tanned blimp across the Atlantic who is rejecting globalization. And it's kind of doomed to failure because that particular model assumes that we can go back to the industries of the 50s. And frankly, it can't work. I mean, you had to be an idiot not to see that, but I rest my case. Globalization has its benefits, the sharing of knowledge, and the production of things in one place that can't be efficiently produced in another. If we add in the carbon footprints, that changes things a little, more than a little. So it's not that one model's wrong and the other's right, but there are strengths and weaknesses. Certainly globalization. I mean, it's interesting that the US is trying to reject globalization as a model when it has been the prime beneficiary of globalization.
I guess they're rejecting because now, or maybe after a few years, they might not be the prime beneficiary.
Yeah, basically, throw the toys out the pram.
They are rejecting. But if you come on this side of the globe, I mean, if you think from our perspective, yeah, maybe for last few decades, we might not have the benefits of it, but at the same time, I'm not sure because always we are driven by, this, the problems that we think. I wonder whether those are really our problems or those are the problems perceived by developed world, that those are the problems.
I've been involved in international development a lot of my life, and often it's white people going and tell you what your problems are, and that's the problem.
Yes.
I've written quite a lot on water management, specifically in India. Written books on what works in terms of water harvesting and all the rest of it. And I say with all humility, I come to talk to illiterate people because they have wisdom. I know how to write stuff, but they have the wisdom. Because they've been doing it for 4,500 years, and that's pretty sustainable. So some things work very well here. I've kind of lost track of where the question was, but don't lose the wisdom you have in pursuit of other models of development is one of the key things. I see, every time I go to Delhi, I see the tendrils of McDonald's and KFC and Domino pizzas spreading further and further down the highways. And it's, I've had cancer. I know what it's like. And that's what I see. These cells invading. You don't need it. You've got rich culture. Frankly, your food's really good and theirs isn't, Did you know, by the way, KFC, they import all the chicken frozen from America. It's not as if you're benefiting from the farming. That is a complete neo-colonial imperialism happening right there. And, well, if unilateralism is going to happen in the US, good. They can take their chicken back.
Chicken with all the artificial, Anyway, no, is there any more? I mean, I'm going to stop it, then I will finish it. No, so.
I don't see any hands.
Okay, good. No,
There's one right here.
I'll do one short question. And then,
We'll get there, don't worry.
this is...
No, I just want to make sure that mine is the last, so that...
Okay.
This is more of I see a lot of optimism coming from your talk,
Yes.
whereas my reactions are being very pessimistic from what you are saying.
Mhm.
Like, if you project it as to what the problems are and the possible solutions are, because none of this is a priority a top priority for a nation or for the globe, for that matter. In the sense, most of the decisions are made on economics. Power and power is dictated directly by access to resources and so on and so forth. And no country has gone to war because they feel the other country is not recycling. And it's most of the energy of the human race is driven towards power and economics. And so that, as you said, when you go and get the 50 rupee note from the bank, it has no blood on it. But in the background, all that happens.
Yeah.
So much of what we care for
Yes.
is not driving the decision making in any significant way in a large scale. So it's very hard to, but I see a lot of optimism coming from
Yes.
you. You are almost determined to be optimistic, because I suppose you see a solution or a way through when you're optimistic. I buy that. But I just want your reflection on this point of it. How do you not be pessimistic in this? So if you look at the 100 years, 200 years, it is all going in a certain direction. And we are trying to change the direction of
We are.
path that we are traveling on. And the recent past hundreds of years, we have not really deviated too much from the direction in which we are heading. Unless things rebalance at a much larger scale, 8.3 becomes 10, but then it has to come down and then there is another kind of recalibration that happens, not just on resource level, economics level, but at a scales that we may not understand, and dimensions and mysteries that we don't understand.
Yeah.
So maybe it will happen, rebalancing will happen there. Maybe there is some room for optimism there. But how do you see where do you draw your seemingly inexhaustible source of optimism from? Because
Right. Easy answer, because I've decided to. Because in the game that we've been involved in, I mean, I've been doing this for 50 odd years as a professional, let alone before that. And I talked about some of the horror stories of Minamata and the Torrey Canyon tanker disaster. They absolutely horrified me. I feel a bit teary just, thinking back 50 years of the things that got me to care. Sorry about this. And you can be crushed by it, or you can say, I'm not going to have it. So some of my books, Rebuilding the Earth, is blatantly optimistic only, because we can change it, and I can't allow myself to think that we can't. So it's an act. You need both. When I go to the pub in the village on a Friday, someone says, what have you been doing? I say, I've just been talking about the chemical industry or whatever. And I say, well, most people can't handle the severity of the challenges that the world faces. They change the subject, or they make a joke of it, or whatever, because they can't hold the gravity of it. Because of that, they don't deal with the issue. But you actually need that bit of biopolarity to be able to hold the gravity and then be so positive that you will find solutions. Because, you know, the world I've grown up in is not benign. It is going in the wrong direction. So what am I going to do about that? I'm going to shut the door and watch the television and, you know, have another beer, or am I just going to go out fighting? And I've made that decision. So, sorry, that surprised me. Just how emotional I sort of felt going back to. But underneath it all, yes, I am horrified by the world that I see. But I'm not going to let that crush me. I'll do what I can. And I'm sure you feel the same, you know, because we can make a better future. I absolutely believe we can. The world might rebalance by annihilating itself. If you look at, you know, what happened in the Middle East, a lot of it is about water wars. It's the limiting resource. We've had oil wars, we've got water wars, we've got food wars. Ukraine, all the Greenland stuff is about rare earth minerals. Underneath it all, there's a limiting resource. Because we live in a finite world, in that funnel. But we have to believe that we can innovate and make a better world. And I won't have it any other way.
Thank you. I think we can keep talking forever. It's a fascinating subject. So those of you who raised a question, please, you can read this book called Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie. How can we be the first generation to build a sustainable planet? Okay, it's a nice book to read. I'm not saying I agree with her everything, but I mean, she does talk about the fact that we have the capacity to rebalance. Okay, all right. Whether we use that capacity is a different matter. Okay, but we have the capacity. Whether we, as a body of, you know, society, do we use that capacity to rebalance is of course an open question, but there are lots of opportunities to do so, and I think that's a message I think we should convey to your children and your grandchildren, you know, because it's important, because they should not lose hope, you know, otherwise, you know. So this is a book by Hannah Ritchie. She's part of this Our World in Data, you know. She works for that organization.
Okay.
And this is a nice book called Not the End of the World, you know. And there are multiple ways of looking at it, but I think his point is that the way I look at it, Magesh, is, you know, is there something that, you know, can we do anything otherwise? You know, is it this not, is optimism is probably the default, you know, position that we can take, because there is nothing we can do by being pessimistic, you know. I think we have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
You know, it's my opinion default mode. Anyway, my last question, I think it has been enough of philosophical discussion. The last question, and this I always ask this question to myself, you know, and I wonder whether there has been any kind of a thinking around it. You and I belong to one generation. We grew up. You talked about that. You know, I saw the man landing on the moon. You know, on the television, and it was one of those exciting times when innovation was driving, you know, the world at all fronts. You know, and we now know that we made mistakes at that point of time. We could have been little bit more wiser in our choices, you know, and we did, maybe for some reason we did not make those alternate choices, and that's one of the reasons why we are in a particular state of existence today. Do you think that today, or for that matter now, we are making better choices?
I think we've got the tools to make better choices, which is not the same thing. You know, I was at Nickmar University this morning, just making the point that I was at the inauguration of a new data center there, which was really great. And I just made the point that for many years in our sector, we've been sort of saying, I wonder if we'll be the first species on Earth to monitor its own extinction. Because we've never had so much data, we've never had so much processing power, and yet we still act stupid. So yeah, we have the capacity. Do we have the wisdom? And my stuck record is always systems, systems, systems. Are we systems thinking? Because if we are, then we can see the problems and we can innovate to do it better. Instead of like yesterday's bad chemical, we knee-jerk and then do tomorrow's bad chemical and the bad chemical the next day. I mean, we've done it for so many years. Let's backcast. The issue is crop protection. That doesn't necessarily mean chemistry. Chemistry is part of it. But that's not all it means. I mean, our ancestors were doing rotational farming, okay, lower intensity. But we don't do that now because we're locked into this Western model of intensive, input, invest, suicidal farmers because they don't have the output. And the model's broken. So our ancestors did systems think by default. Now we can do it consciously, and we can put it into policy, and we can put it into industrial innovation. And please do it, younger people, because your futures do depend on it, to doing better than our generation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, with that, I request Dr. NCL, Dr. Lele to hand over a memento on the token of our appreciation.
This is for you to remember.
Nikma.
To NCL.
Not NCL.
NCL.
Whoops. Whoops.
And a book about NCL.
Ah, Dhanyavad. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oops. We'll do the handshake with the... Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.